So everyone is talking about the Nationals out now that they are going to oppose the Voice. But the reason everyone's talking about it is because of Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa Price. She joins us now from Canberra. And Senator, firstly, and as always, the clarity and passion. The way you spoke today was like somebody who had been working 20 years to achieve a bill going through the Parliament and something happened. This is your first year in Parliament and you've been able to get a clear statement out of your political party based off the idea that some of the poorest and most vulnerable people live in National Party areas, and many of them are Indigenous, and you want some actions. So let's talk about the actions, all right? We'll get back to the Voice debate, but let's imagine you get what you want, this thing is no. What do you need? What does government have to produce for you other than a debate about the Voice?
Well, I think firstly, we need to focus on Australians who are in need. When we create opportunities, we should be creating those opportunities and they should be means tested, not race tested. We need to get away from this idea that people are automatically disadvantaged if they come from an Indigenous background. We need to get people away from welfare, for starters. Less government in people's lives, less welfare, which means we need to help generate economic development opportunities for traditional owners on their country so that they are the job creators. We know that when adults have a job, children tend to go to school, and then that supports communities then. I said today also, if you want to see socialism at play, go out to a remote community. It's there on display. Everyone's welfare dependent. There's very little jobs available, and now there's alcohol back out in these remote communities. So we need to stop the grog back out in these remote communities again. We need to make communities safer. We need to allow for Indigenous Australians to be empowered through employment opportunities and to aim for economic sovereignty and economic independence. That's what we need to do. And as I said, serve Australians on the basis of need, not on race.
Now, obviously, straight after making that announcement this afternoon, and judging by the videotape, it was daylight, so the project had time to book you on their show tonight. 7:30 Report had time to book you on their show tonight. How were those appearances this evening?
So I did make it on the ABC afternoon agenda program.
Good.
That's about it so far. I think the 7:30 have been looking to get me on their program, but as a lone voice against the Voice. So until they have a bit of balance on their program, they can keep asking. And but certainly the project aren't interested.
Yeah. Well, so the reason I asked that question was because I was fascinated by how your news conference was reported, how it was spun. Now, generally speaking, the way that these organisations do is that they have to write that something happened. So Nationals come out against the Voice. They have to write Jacinta Price says passionate thing. But then immediately comes the criticism piece. It's given greater priority, it's given greater attention, or the issue is sort of parked up the back until the voices that are against yours get louder and louder. But you've seen this before in Canberra when you brought people to the Parliament to talk about violence in Indigenous communities. So we all know that the media is going to try and do you in, but how do you get the message that was as powerfully said today in front of the media, in front of normal people? Because I think normal people in poor bits of Australia would absolutely agree with what you said.
Absolutely, and myself and Warren Mundine are planning to do a tour around Australia to speak to communities ourselves. We've had individuals from regional Australia reach out to us. I had a wonderful conversation with a wonderful man, Peter Gibbs, this morning, who's from Western New South Wales, an Indigenous man who is not in favour of the Voice, who has been talking to people throughout the communities that he is involved with as a leader, and he's been talking about, the push for real solutions. This is a man who lost his sister who died in custody, and as a result he pushed for better relationships with police and pushed for more Aboriginal people to join the police force in the communities that he's engaged with. He's an individual who's pushed for practical measures, and these are the kinds of people that we're having conversations with already, and these are the conversations that we'll continue to have to make sure that people understand that their opinion counts as well. And a lot of people don't have a clue at all as to what this voice proposal means. They're concerned because they know that, you know, there are organisations out there who have been funded to support Aboriginal Australians, but where they've been corrupt instead, and they've been inept, and they've not been able to fulfil their obligation to produce outcomes. So there's a lot of distrust for another massive layer of bureaucracy that Indigenous Australians have to then, like red tape, have to go through to try and produce any outcomes. And, you know, activists in the day fought for equality, fought for the same rights as other Australians, and that's what we've got. But now you give activists a centimetre, they want to take a mile, and that's what's going on with this voice proposal that has no detail.
Also, again, I was so moved by what you said and what we're talking about here, which is to go, okay, let's look at things by postcode. Let's look at things by those readings as opposed to the cultural stuff that everyone wants to, the establishment wants to confuse everything with. And the reality is that, okay, there might be slightly different ways of doing it, but the same way an old school housing commission place in Western Sydney needed to get turned around, well, guess what? That's going to be the case for certain parts of other suburbs where the Indigenous population is going to be different. But why don't we just use exactly the same techniques that we would use, frankly, for poor white people with other Australians?
That's exactly right. And that's where our problems have come from. The fact that Indigenous Australians have been treated differently and separately to the rest of Australia, instead of saying, hey, hang on, these are Australian citizens. Why don't we apply to their circumstances the same things that we apply to other Australian citizens who are, socio-economically challenged, and see if we can't help them along in those terms. I mean, we've got the formula already exists. The problem is this divisiveness and a grievance industry that's been built on this divisiveness, that has been rewarded on this divisiveness, and that are now seeking to be inserted into the Constitution. You're absolutely right. We should be serving Australians, as treating everyone as Australian citizens, regardless of heritage. The most marginalised, the gap is between those in those remote regional parts of Australia and the rest of Australia, including urban, middle-class Aboriginal Australians who are doing perfectly fine in their neck of the woods. That's where the gap exists, so that's where the focus has to be, is on those marginalised who actually need real support.
Senator, I know you could have talked to any and everyone 4 times over. I'm really thankful that you spoke to me, and more importantly, the people watching us right now. Good on you, Jacinta.